It's now my distinct honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Kalanithi as the 2017 guest commencement speaker. Dr. Lucy Kalanithi, MD, FACP, is the widow of the late Dr. Paul Kalanithi, author of the #1 New York Times bestselling memoir, When Breath Becomes Air, for which she wrote the epilogue. Lucy is an internal medicine physician and faculty member at Stanford School of Medicine in Palo Alto, California. She completed her medical degree at Yale, where she was inducted into the Alpha Omega Alpha National Medical Honor Society. She completed her residency at the University of California, San Francisco, and a postdoctoral fellowship training in healthcare delivery innovation at Stanford's Clinical Excellence Research Center. At the cross-section of her career as a medical professional and her personal experience standing alongside her husband during his life, diagnosis, treatment, and death, Dr. Kalanithi has special interest in healthcare value, a meaning in medicine, patient-centered care, and end-of-life care. She has appeared on PBS NewsHour, NPR Morning Edition, and Yahoo News with Katie Couric, and been interviewed for People, NPR, and the New York Times. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her daughter, Elizabeth Acadia, and she's just a delightful person. You're going to enjoy her talk, I'm certain. So please welcome.
Good morning and thank you. Thank you, Chancellor Gilman, Vice Chancellor Fedoroff, and Dean Stamos. Thank you to Dean Toohey and the class of 2017 for inviting me here. I'm just delighted to be here on this exciting day. 10 years ago, my husband Paul and I were graduating from medical school as newlyweds. We met as first-year students, and we were basically the Jessica Gandy and Brian Labadie of our class. And 10 years ago this month, Paul and I sat where you sit, hearing the word doctor in front of our names for the first time. Let me tell you quickly about Paul. I fell in love with Paul because he kept a gorilla suit in the trunk of his car. He used to say, "It's for emergencies only." He later said he fell in love with me when he saw me cry over a practice EKG, I'm going to take this off, of V-fib degenerating to asystole. It was the first time that I had seen a heart cease beating. A few years after graduation, I had become an internist, and Paul was a chief resident in neurosurgery when he started to lose weight. He developed excruciating back pain and a cough, and the diagnosis came when we looked at his CT scan together. Stage 4 lung cancer. Over the next 22 months before Paul died in 2015, he finished his residency and wrote a memoir about his transformation from doctor to patient. He called it When Breath Becomes Air. And in its pages, he reflected on living and on his lifelong quest, as he put it, to keep following the question of what makes human life meaningful, even in the face of death and decay. In practicing medicine, he discovered much of that meaning. But his passion for medicine, and mine, was not without its complications, as we all learned sooner or later. And one of the ways Paul first faced those complications says a lot about him. You all have a medical student ID, and you'll probably never wear it again, right? Just like you'll never have to wear a short white coat again. Congratulations, at least unless you're going somewhere like Johns Hopkins, maybe? Sorry, Christopher Pieggi and Jessica Zhu. Well, when Paul stepped up to have his student ID photo taken on the first day of medical school, he stood in front of the camera and pulled out of his pocket a fake mustache, a big, bushy, unmissable fake mustache, and slapped it onto his face. Paul had been a comedy writer in college, but he understood well the seriousness of medical culture. He worried that the system would eventually suck the humor out of him, that it might change him in fundamental ways. And yes, that photo ended up on our class face sheet, and 3 years later, the mustache stared back at every neurosurgery attending who was writing Paul a recommendation letter for residency. But in the meantime, that ID photo with the mustache was an amulet that Paul used to protect himself from some nascent fear of losing his humanity. He recognized the possible danger, so he fashioned an amulet to protect himself. Ernest Hemingway wrote, "The world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places." He actually meant it more darkly than that sounds, but the idea stands. Paul and I found that practicing medicine made us weaker and stronger. It enriched us in ways we couldn't have imagined, although at times we felt broken. Paul's amulet was so important. If Hemingway's right and the world breaks all of us, then that amulet made him even stronger at the broken places. And you will need amulets of your own. I can't give them to you, and not all of you can pull off a mustache like Paul did. But what I can do is share some of the challenges we faced as physicians and how we made sense of them. So if you're taking notes, our first breaking point, hard work. Parents, I suggest you cover your ears for this story. Cover your ears. During my residency, I had to drive 30 miles home after every overnight call at the end of a 30-hour shift. I was exhausted, as you well know. So a friend of ours taught me to wedge a lock of my hair in the sunroof of the car so I wouldn't be able to drop my head and fall asleep while I was driving. It worked, though for the record, I do not recommend that arrangement. Okay, parents, you can come back now. And doctors, that little trick should probably stay between us. Paul wrote this about medicine. People often ask if it's a calling, and my answer is always yes. You can't see it as a job because if it's a job, it's one of the worst jobs there is. It is a calling, and we do the hard work, especially in the early years as we're training to become competent and confident. And the work may ease up, but we put our patients' needs above our own, and we work intensely to impact science in our communities, and we do that hard work in service of something great. After Paul was diagnosed with terminal cancer, he struggled not just with his mortality, but with his identity. He was slowly regaining strength on a novel EGFR tyrosine kinase inhibitor, but he lacked purpose. Writing about that time, he said, "I woke up in pain, facing another day. No project beyond breakfast seemed tenable. I can't go on, I thought." And immediately its antiphon responded, completing Samuel Beckett's 7 words, "I'll go on. I can't go on, I'll go on." That morning, I made a decision. I would push myself to return to the OR. Why? Because I could. Because that's who I was. Because even if I'm dying, until I actually die, I'm still living. Why would someone work that hard, endure the incredibly difficult work of residency, and then return to it, given the limitations of a terminal diagnosis? It wasn't because Paul was a gunner. It's because he was a doctor. He also wrote, "I don't think I ever spent a minute of any day wondering why I did this work or whether it was worth it. The call to protect life, and not merely life, but another's identity. It's perhaps not too much to say another's soul was obvious in its sacredness." Breaking point number 2, witnessing pain. When I was a medicine intern, I took care of a young veteran, with AIDS and CNS lymphoma. And he was so severely neurologically compromised, he couldn't get out of bed. And then he became unable to communicate. I was completely overwhelmed by witnessing it. Our work requires that we enter into the pain of other people, physical pain, psychological pain, existential pain, bearing witness and choosing to accept the pain and uncertainty that our patients face. And sometimes we forget that the act of bearing witness is its own kind of burden. As a resident, I went through an episode of depression and got help from a therapist. I was afraid to tell anybody about it at first. I thought I was the only one. I worried my career was over, but it wasn't. And during one session, when my therapist saw me struggling with really strong emotions, she got up and wrote on a whiteboard this simple formula: pain plus non-acceptance of pain equals suffering. At first, I didn't get it. I thought to myself, but I don't want this pain. Of course, I don't accept it. But slowly, I learned that resisting pain can make it harder to bear and even keep us from experiencing our lives fully. The true danger lies in resisting it. That lesson crystallized for me 5 years later in a conversation with Paul. We had always planned to have children toward the end of Paul's residency, but obviously it was not part of our plan for Paul to become terminally ill at that time. Soon after he was diagnosed, we broached the idea of having a child while he had advanced lung cancer. Each of us worried about the other, and I asked him, "Don't you think having to say goodbye to a child will make dying more painful for you?" And his answer astounded me. He said, "Wouldn't it be great if it did?" We were learning that living fully means accepting pain, that life isn't about choosing the easiest path. But you already know that. You're doctors, and you've entered into a different and deeper relationship with pain and suffering. Being a witness to pain is not ancillary. It's a core, vital part of what we do. And we get to see the human condition on full display. For me and Paul, it made our lives richer, and it made us more resilient. Because of that, because life and hardship are unshakably bound together, and because of the boldest and best decision Paul and I ever made, our daughter, Katie, is about to turn 3. She's over there with my dad. Breaking point number 3, pursuit of perfection. I think you can all relate to this one. You wouldn't have made it this far if you didn't already have a pretty close relationship with the pursuit of perfection. When you enter medicine, you stop being motivated by grades or achievement, and instead by a profound desire to heal other people. But that's hard too, and in some ways it's harder. I get to quote Paul again here, which is good because quoting Paul is basically my favorite thing to do. He wrote, "Good intentions were not enough, not when so much depended on my skills, when the difference between tragedy and triumph was defined by 1 or 2 millimeters. The ineluctable failures brought me nearly unbearable guilt. In taking up another's cross, one must sometimes get crushed by the weight." You've already sensed this immense responsibility and driven yourself to study and work and try and try and try, all in the pursuit of perfection. And this is as it should be. You will hold in your hands the lives of your patients. You should continue to pursue perfection with your heart's full measure. But don't subscribe to the belief that you might ever or should ever achieve it. I'll borrow Paul's words once again. "Yet death always wins. Even if you are perfect, the world isn't. The secret is to know that the deck is stacked, that you will lose, that your hands or judgment will slip, and yet still struggle to win for your patients. You can't ever reach perfection, but you can believe in an asymptote toward which you are ceaselessly striving." And to me, that concept of the asymptote isn't just an expression of unattainability. It's an acknowledgement of forever needing to leave a space, to recognize our patience and our own humanity and fallibility, and to give ourselves and each other the permission to strive for, but not the pressure to be perfect. So there we are, 3 major challenges for new physicians, 3 possible breaking points: hard work, witnessing pain, and the pursuit of perfection. Those challenges won't go away. They're part and parcel of what we do. They're some of the worst parts of medicine, but they're also some of the best. But there's one more challenge that I really worry about. And it's not just an individual challenge. It's a collective responsibility. Dean Federoff mentioned it. It's one of the worst things we face as physicians, and that's burnout. People enter medical school with better well-being than their peers, but somewhere along the line, something happens. More than half of physicians in the US are burned out, twice as high a rate as in the general population, and that includes half of residents. Dr. Christina Maslach is a leader on burnout at UC Berkeley, and she called it erosion of the soul. It's different from stress. It's a constellation of exhaustion, ineffectiveness, and cynicism. Burnout affected me, and it affected Paul too, who described it like this: "I feared I was becoming Tolstoy's stereotype of a doctor, focused on the rote treatment of disease and utterly missing the larger human significance. Burnout affected our marriage, and it can lead to substance abuse and depression and job turnover and loss of meaning. And the worst part, we physicians also have twice the risk of suicide as the general population. Suicide takes the lives of 400 US physicians every year, and one of Paul's most dear friends, a brilliant surgeon, was among them. That's roughly twice the number of physicians here today. I worry a lot about burnout, as you can tell, for myself and my mentors and for new physicians like you. And the key thing we need to realize about burnout is it comes at us from two directions: our ability as individuals to cope and our work environment. Burnout isn't just an individual problem, it's a system problem. Dr. Tate Shanafelt of Mayo Clinic studies the key drivers of burnout, and there's system factors like unrealistic workload and inefficiency and loss of autonomy and meaningful work. But many health systems treat burnout and professional satisfaction as solely the responsibility of the individual physician, so solutions tend to focus on promoting wellness. But that's incomplete, it's a mistake. It sends the message that if you're burned out, there's something wrong with you. Physician burnout is the shared responsibility of individual physicians and the health system, and solutions need to reflect that. Being a physician is a calling, but we need to make sure that the job is sustainable. That's how we can take the best care of our patients. There's a moral case and a business case for mitigating burnout. Thankfully, we're shifting the paradigm. For one, the ACGME, which oversees residency and fellowship programs, is recognizing burnout as a system issue. And as the paradigm shifts, we do need to take care of ourselves as individuals. For me, coping as a physician and a caregiver and a widow, and now a mom, means prioritizing exercise and sleep and mindfulness meditation, which I'm obsessed with, and social connection, and seeking help when I needed it. You know, among physicians who've had suicidal ideation, a majority were reluctant to seek help because they were scared it would influence their medical licenses. I remember having that fear. But that stigma is crumbling too. And if I could tell myself then what I know now, I'd say it's okay to seek help. In fact, it's crucial. And you will feel so much better, I promise. But thriving as physicians does take more than our own resilience and grit, which you already have in spades because you've made it this far. We need those systemic changes too, and your leadership will be part of that. I heard something recently that summed up really well the need to attack burnout from both sides. The quote, "If there's a canary in the coal mine, you can't just teach the canary to meditate." It's funny, right? There's a common view that physicians burn out or leave medicine because of those individual challenges I mentioned before, like the suffering we witness or the call to perfection. But I don't think that's true. My instinct is that those challenges reflect some of what we care most about in taking care of our patients. And those challenges are the reason that we stay. The good news is this: if we can support each other, and like Hemingway said, make each other strong at the broken places, then those challenges become deeply meaningful and sustaining. Practicing medicine is a little like a marriage, which means today is your wedding day, though the gown is a little different, and this was way, way more expensive. But married people today can attest to the fact that you don't live a marriage in the big moments. You live it in the day-to-day. You wake up every morning choosing the relationship again, choosing it over and over. And when problems come, be they depression or burnout or even cancer, you work through them together. I used to think the most romantic part of a wedding was the kiss, but now I think it's everything that comes after. I'd like to leave you with a short poem. It's called Good Bones by Maggie Smith. It's really dark, but it's also kind of funny. Life is short, though I keep this from my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. 1,000 deliciously ill-advised ways I'll keep from my children. The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, though I keep that from my children. For every bird, there is a stone thrown at a bird. For every loved child, a child broken, bagged, sunk in a lake. Life is short, and the world is at least half terrible, and for every kind stranger, there is one who would break you, though I keep this from my children. I am trying to sell them the world. Any decent realtor walking you through a real shithole chirps on about good bones. This place could be beautiful, right? You could make this place beautiful. I didn't share that poem because medicine is perfect, of course. It's really not perfect. But I would choose it again. And I would choose to marry Paul again, too, even knowing that I'd lose him. As for Paul, his identity as a physician was why I believe he died, not leaving everything he wanted, but having everything he wanted. And despite medicine's imperfections, that asymptote that Paul wrote about, that's our responsibility, to heal patients in the fullest sense of that word, to believe in an asymptote of what we can be, both as physicians and as a profession, and to ceaselessly strive toward it. I believe you'll do it well, and I'm thrilled to call myself your colleague. Thank you again for the privilege of speaking to you. Now go, make this place beautiful. Thank you.